2020 budget, the projection is of around 13 lakh crore or something. So, and there is surely will be a huge shortfall in that. So what sort of a fiscal gap or hole are we looking at, and what are the options before the finance minister to address this gap? And I really cannot address. On this direct tax side, I am quite sure that there is very little that can be done or proposed. Very little can be done directly, except that in the proposals, the compliance requirements, the time limits of compliance have been increased, and with a minor thing that the 25% reduction in the advanced tax rates, which anyway the person will have to pay the next year. So it does. Is basically a question of 6, 8 months, 10 months. So the position is very tight on the fiscal side, and I find that there's little scope for any drastic relief from any tax burden, because it will severely impact the collections, which already I think there will be a huge shortfall in the next year. Last year there was a shortfall of 3 lakh crore. This year, conservative estimate 5 to 6 lakh crore is very conservative on the direct side, tax side. So I really wonder what can be done. If the panelists can please specify what sort of direct tax measures are they looking for, then probably I can also understand what what can be done in this regard. So I think I'll wait for that proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So now the floor is open for all the panelists, to sort of, probably, pick up a few threads from, each panelist's ideas and suggestions, and maybe Mr. Sridhar could come up with certain questions. For instance, sir, in this Vivad Se Biswas scheme, I personally feel that this is a golden opportunity for the Honorable Minister to further liberalize this scheme, and unlock a huge amount of revenue which is stuck, because I feel that, going by the content of the scheme, the penny stock and some of those black money cases perhaps, probably will be covered largely in this. But some of the serious cases where, SECI has a feeling and their legal, the advice is perhaps that, you have a good chance, probably they will not come under this scheme. So maybe the government should try to make this scheme a little more attractive, so that more and more, the taxpayers could come forward, and, perhaps that could give us, more revenue to the exchange.
Yeah, precisely. I would like to comment on this, because in my view, the only thing which can be done in the present circumstance is to address the question of tax disputes in a very serious manner. Now, this has been partially addressed through this Vivad Se Vikas scheme, but I agree that it needs to be further liberalized. For instance, I know it as a fact that one of the sections in Income Tax Act 115 BBE that proposes a tax rate of 60% where the person is not able to prove the source of if it's undisclosed, from income from undisclosed sources. So a lot of assessments have been made last year, primarily relating to the period when demonetization took place, and lots of demand has been raised on this at this rate of 60%. Now, at 60% rate is a penal rate. In the Vivad Se Vikas scheme, penalty has been separately dealt with. Otherwise, penalties, no penalty is leviable. Only you have to pay the disputed tax, no interest penalty. And penalty, if you are appealing only against the penalty, then it is up 25%. So I think this type of additions, 60% taxation, because no person who has been levied at 60% will pay 60%, because that itself is a penal rate. Similarly, I'll tell you another instance where assessment has been made of a particular amount, where some additions have been made to the total income. Now, suppose the taxpayer comes under the scheme. In the subsequent 3 years, 2-3 years for which the proceedings are pending or proceedings have not yet commenced, the same issues are there. So there is no this scheme whereby he can settle all these disputes together. The one which is in appellate forum and similar issue which is there in a proceedings or in a return for which the proceedings have not yet commenced, notice has not been issued. So that sort of, because the taxpayer feels that once I go under we can say for 1 year, for the next year and for the next year and for the next year, the department will treat it as a precedent and make an addition to my total income based on my declaration under Vivad se Vishwas scheme. So this type of liberalization is required. Similarly, I would also go further and say that even disputes which are pending in proceedings at the moment, which are proceedings have not been finalized, they should also be addressed. There should be some proposal, some scheme under which there should be a scheme for resolution of such disputes, and we can give a very, very sweet deal to the taxpayer so that he feels happy. The government is in a tight position. It will get the revenue this year, even a part of the revenue, because the total outstanding arrear demand is around 10 lakh crore. And 10 lakh crore, and plus if we add, the likely demand which will arise in proceedings which are pending, it will be something like 12 lakh, 13 lakh crores. And if we even get some 15% of that demand, then
a huge amount.
A big thing, and from which it gives us the fiscal space to do something positive on the other side, on the demand side. A lot of people are talking about cash transfers, 5,000, 7,000 per month. So that will give the room. So in my opinion, the department, income tax department, should not go for enforcement in this year. They should only address themselves for resolution of disputes, either which have been finalized or disputes which are before them. They should work out a mechanism, make out some law in which some resolution is reached and taxpayer is also happy. Maybe the tax demand that arises therefrom can be spread over the next few years, 1, 2, 3 years. So that will give revenue to the government, because so much of demand is locked up in disputes, and we need, and this is as it has been said, that is an opportunity also. So I feel that the income tax department has a huge opportunity of cleaning up its own stables. I would request other members to also react to this.
Shailendra, only one point, everybody talked about the overall situation. There are a few sectors which we also told in our earlier webinars also, which are really affected. We would like to touch upon two sectors. One is the latest report on aviation. IATA says that there is a chance that 29,32,000 jobs could be lost. Passenger traffic declined by more than 47%. Now we are still collecting the airport authorities are collecting a lot of user development fees. It is all got award objectives. But for the industry which is in doldrums today, aviation. Then second is hotel, tourism and hospitality. There was a representation, and there was an article coverage in all the press about the representation of the views of faith, the Federal Association for India for Travel and Tourism and Hospitality. They are saying up to 70% of their workforce could get perhaps unemployed, which is roughly 5.5 crores, they said. And it is all appeared in the press. And they are saying that even if there is a revival by October 2020, inbound tourism is bound to be affected by nothing less than 20 to 25%. Summer outbound tourism in India, these are all numbers which appeared in all the top press dailies. 40% is lost. Now, at least for these two sectors, which are going to be so crucial, there should be something immediately as a panacea for them, because there is, if you cumulatively understand what Tarun said, Shiv said, and Balbir said, you can divide two people into one who's above water, one who's below water. The sectors which I have just now described in the last 2 minutes are not below water. They are in submarine conditions. Unless we do something that would really help them, they may not even be lifted. And the more you lose workers, the more you lose You are not going to, you can't get to redeploy them so easily as what we think. We are going to lose people in employment. So at least for these two sectors, there should be something.
Yes.
Please, sir, please go ahead.
Sorry, only 1 minute. I was just thinking about this. I think there are some questions that were posed to the officials or the minister about specific sector-wise assistance. Two things came out of these answers. One is that they said that all measures are tailored for all the sectors. That is a broad type reply that was given. Therefore, all measures will ultimately result in improvement of every sector that is affected and all that. That is one. But more specifically is, I think, what I hear from the last few days. I think there is a possibility of addressing each sector which is sought to be affected. That is the feel I get when I read some of the newspapers. Now, whether they are going to again draw a blanket that for all each one of these sectors we will give some particular amount and thereafter then they have to manage the remaining, I don't know. But I think there's some discussion on that we are going to address some of these sectors specifically. And one of them that was being discussed was this aviation. So what is it that they are going to do for the sector? We don't know. But I think there's some possibility or a proposal to discuss sector-wise packages. Of course, others can also throw open on that. I am not too sure about that.
Right, yeah, Mr. Balvir would like to add something here.
Yeah, I think the one thing is very clear, as I mentioned earlier, in this stimulus package, there is no differentiation on a sectoral basis. So that's very clear, and which is extremely relevant to be done today. But if we broadly see any sector, how that can be stimulated are primarily two ways can be done. Something you can give them and something you don't take from them. And something you don't take from them can be various types of taxes and levies, or their lease rental where the state governments have leased those land for longer period of time. What you can give them possibly is that one, cheaper loans, which can be part of MSME or they may not be part of MSME. And as Tarun mentioned that why this bifurcation of MSME only will be benefited by the state guarantee, which is to be given against these kind of loans. But that being that's a separate issue. My concern is that 3 lakh crores, which are supposed to go to MSMEs, where the government of India is going to stand guarantee, and 20,000 odd crores to the stressed MSMEs where the money is going to go. In my experience, and if you look at what in the past we have seen, that out of this 3,20,000 crores, there is going to be a very significant amount of money which is going to be a bad debt or NPA at some stage. Because today there is no classification of stressed or non-stressed assets so far as when the MSME is going to pick up. Possibly this is one space, and we know for sure that the tourism and hotel industry is bound to pick up. Entertainment is bound to pick up because historically they have been surviving very well in the last 10 years time span. Some money can be pulled out of this because this money which is going to go to MSMEs, it is not that in next 3 months this money is going to go to their pocket. This money is, and MSMEs will not be up and running in next 6 months that they'll be needing this 3,20,000 odd crores. Some money out of this should be picked up, and that should be leveraged against something which is not to be imposed on these hotel and tourism industry. I think that's a trade-off which is one possible, and that's going to give some lease of life to areas which we know for sure are going to work. We know that the hotels are going to work. We know that for sure that the entertainment sector is going to work. We know for sure that the shopping malls are going to work, at least in the urban spaces which are there. But you are not looking at these assets which we know these are monetizable assets. We know that these are areas where there is going to be revenue in 6, 8, 10 months time span. Vis-a-vis closing your eyes and saying that 3,20,000 crores are to be given unknown MSMEs and government of India is going to protect it. It is not happening in short run. Therefore, utilize this money properly to give it to someone who will be needing it immediately after 6 months to the particular sectors you have talked of. So that's one suggestion I have here. And the second on airline part, airline is completely, is under a sink. And until unless today these airlines are not supported in one way or the other, and it is happening globally. And in my understanding that the government of India is using its authority under the Disaster Management Act and the Pandemic Act and telling that these container freight stations should not charge their charges, and they have issued those kind of advisories and guidelines. Although people are struggling, please use the same methodology for the charges with the airport charges which they collect. There are certain fuel charges which are parking charges are corrected.
User development.
Yeah, so if you use this, because it's not that there is no example. You have example, you are doing it for shipping industry. You need to do it for airline industry also. Please cut down their outflow, and we will see that since the Monday onward, the airline is starting. They'll not be able to start unless in next 3 months, the notices of a huge demands are being raised by the airports and the government authorities and so on and so forth. Please utilize the example of shipping in the airline. That may be given some kind of lease of life to them. That's what in both the areas I think should be done.
Yeah,
and we should also have in mind that both these sectors, while the improvement is expected, but the first fear of people traveling from one place to another, the fear of people going on tourism is going to be there for at least the next 3 months or 6 months. So if I have to travel to maybe to another place, for example, even Chennai, the first fear I have today is, should I stay for 14 days there and come back and stay for 14 days here? Now, that is going to be a very big factor that will play a role in these sectors really looking at a revival. So in which case, all the more important that the government should come back with specific amount determined packages for each one of these sectors.
Yeah, Mr. Tarun would like to add something here. Yes.
I think you must remind him to switch on the mic.
Yeah, I have one myself. Sorry. I think I agree with some of these comments being made by my fellow panelists. One, I think, now let's talk specifically on indirect taxes and then specifically on direct taxes. Some points here that given that these are extraordinary circumstances and there is very little which has been done on the demand side, I think it will be inevitable to make products and services cheaper for people to be able to consume them. Today, everybody has a fear. Cash is king. Whatever is lying in your bank account, people want to protect that. If you want people to spend, you will necessarily have to take steps to make goods and services cheaper. You may have to bring no exemptions, but you may have to moderate taxes a little bit on the indirect tax side. You may have to look at sector-wise, like what has been said. You may have to look at airlines, hospitality, entertainment. These are the ones which are immediately affected. But at the same time, many people who are, many industries like automobiles, white goods industries, people who are manufacturing air conditioners, refrigerators, TVs, many people are going to put off these purchases because these are not times when you indulge in luxury purchases at all. All these industries are going to be impacted in the medium term. Transportation industry. Many of these industries will require support, and therefore that reduction to make goods and services affordable for people is something which the government will have to look, whether they do it immediately or in the very short run, but they will necessarily have to look at this. Please understand one thing, that only a higher rate of tax does not generate revenue. The turnover of sales will also, if the higher the turnover, the more the tax also. So if you moderate it, you may ultimately end up earning more. So it's not just the high rate of tax which will earn you more. Today, if you make goods and services cheaper in this market, maybe the government will also gain, and it will create a demand. So that is one factor which necessarily has to be taken into account. Third, I think threshold limits in GST, goods, limits for goods, limits for services, maybe they can be brought up so that, the marginal people, they can be excluded from this compliance burden, from paying the tax. In fact, it is maybe costing more to make them comply. So maybe this is the time at least to look at that and see whether you can have a uniform, slightly higher limit for goods and services and do something about that. Fourth area, I think, where the government seriously needs to look at is credits in ITC. Now, there are several issues on ITC which I think the government needs to look at. One, there are accumulated credits across industries, real estate, telecom, where people are unable to use credits. You need to see how you can how you can monetize some of these credits. This is money sitting with them. This is money which they have paid to the government through their suppliers, which the government has collected. And it is an asset lying with them which they cannot use. So are there any schemes that you can put in to monetize these credits so that something which is illiquid right now with them can become liquid? Two, you have to, when you brought in GST, you brought in GST with the avowed objective, there will be a single indirect tax in the country and it will be free flowing. Credits will flow and ultimately the consumer will bear the brunt of only one output tax. Input tax credit will never become a cost to the business. Now you have artificial rules where you are denying credits. For the telecom industry, you say the towers will not get credit. Why? Is that not a cost of the business? Is there no output liability which it is generating that cost? So you have to look at all of this, that why do you have short-term revenue goals by which you are denying credit to people? If GST has to succeed as a tax, as a single indirect tax in the country, then you have to ensure that there is a complete free flow of credits all through. Then you have to look at some levels of cross utilization of credit. Today you have pockets of credit lying either in IGST or in SGST or in CGST and in different states. Somewhere there is excess credit, somewhere there is no credit at all and people are paying cash. These are creating inefficiencies in the system. These are structural changes, and in these times where people are struggling, I think it's very important for you to look at all this. Then look at all the transitional issues where people are suffering because of lack of proper systems. Transitions have not happened properly from the earlier system to now. Look at that seriously and sort it out once and for all. Then the next issue is, today India was becoming the back office of the world. World over, now there is a move to get back jobs into their own jurisdictions. Today we, as an exporter of services, are struggling because of rules which have been put in service tax and now in GST, issues like intermediary, etc. If you really want to make your exports competitive, you will get back those jobs. What numbers you are doing in terms of employment, you can double them if you make your export of services competitive today. You put in policies to say that we will not export taxes. As far as foreign exchange is being earned through services which are being rendered to recipients outside, we will grant the benefit of export of services. It will have a huge impetus, I think, on these issues, on the existence of this industry and on ramping up employment and earning of foreign exchange, if we look at this seriously. And we don't look at it in a myopic way, only to earn some revenue for one commissionerate. That is a larger thing that I think we need to look at, to say that the short-term revenue collections that we do by squeezing businesses, I think that needs to stop for the time being. Then I think somebody spoke about a pandemic cess or a corona cess or something. When we're talking about moderation, this is something which certainly we can't afford. Well, the government does need money, but you can collect more money by being a little more magnanimous, I think. If you moderate taxes, you can actually collect more money rather than burdening the businesses with another cess now. I think that's something which certainly should not be done. Then we are talking about investments which are flowing out of China. How do we attract those investments here? Please put in a policy straight away. Announce it all over the world that we are giving a very attractive policy right now. We'll give you rebates on taxes based on your investments. And once you say that, implement it. Don't say that I'm going to change it 2 years from now and promissory estoppel will not apply and blah, blah, blah. All of those send out very, very negative signals throughout the world. And I think we need to be very cautious of the fact that you may have won a particular case by saying that I'm justified in withdrawing an exemption which I allowed to attract investment, but it sends a very negative signal to the industry. The last point, I think, which the government, it may not be a stimulus measure, but the government needs to look at very seriously, is a relook at the anti-profiteering law. Very poor law in conception and very poor law in implementation, according to me. It's absurd, the kind of things that are being done in that. You are actually interfering in business decisions every day by saying that you can't charge a particular price. In times like these, when people are even struggling to break even, if the government authorities goes and tells a business you cannot charge X, you can only charge X minus Y, I think that is going to surely kill whatever business sentiment is left in this country. So I think it's very important for the government to look at it in a positive way, and see if we can either do away with it or rehash it in a way that it actually serves some purpose. A few points on the direct tax side. The government has announced on income tax refunds. Now, income tax refunds, what are income tax refunds that we are talking about? This is money which a business or an individual or a corporate has overpaid to the government when he self-assesses his own tax. Now, the legislative scheme has been that unless there are exceptional circumstances, you must grant the refund. All over the country, whether it started with Tata Teleservices, then Bombay in Delhi High Court, then Bombay High Court in Group M and other cases, Tata Construction, Tata Projects, all other high courts have said that you cannot bar income tax refunds without good reason. Section 143(1)(d) was repealed, 241(a) was brought in with the specific purpose that you will record reasons. That means it is putting in a caveat to say that unless there are very good reasons, you will not deny the refund. Recent case of Huawei in Punjab and Haryana High Court rapped the commissionerate on the knuckles, saying that this is not the way in which you can behave, and granted a 325 crore refund to them. Government itself has said that they have granted refunds only up to 5 crores. Why not after the beyond 5 crores? What is the reason to stop those refunds? And today in this stimulus package, you limit it only to cooperatives and trusts and individuals. Why not corporates? This is their money. They have to use it right now. They have the need for this money. You have to grant that. You don't have to give any charity here. This is money belonging to these corporates. You must give it back so that they can use it. They can pay their labor. They can actually utilize it for the benefit of this country. So this needs to be actually taken note of, that corporate refunds have to be granted, and you cannot ask people to go to court to get these refunds. Second point on reduction of TDS. Now there is no reduction in the ultimate tax liability. Whatever reduction in TDS you have given, if somebody has an advanced tax liability, he'll have to pay. And I'm talking here not just of the salaried class. I'm talking about the lakhs of people who are self-employed. Those are the people's salaried class. Even if there is a cut in their salaries, will still survive. Self-employed professionals, self-employed people who are in the tax bracket, who is thinking about them? Even if there is a slight cut in the TDS rate, advanced tax liability is there, and if you fail to pay advanced tax, interest is being levied. Even if the interest rate has been reduced, it is not good enough. You must do something for the middle class of this country. Yes, you have to talk about the migrants. You have to talk about the poorest of the poor. But even people who are in the middle class are suffering today. Somebody needs to take care of their interests. So according to me, just a reduction in the TDS rate, and this TDS rate reduction does not apply to employees at all, because under section 192, you deduct tax not on a specified percentage, but you deduct it on the total tax liability of the employee. So, and because there is no intent in reducing the total tax liability of the employee, obviously the large salaried class population is not affected by this reduction in the TDS rate. The next point is, and many countries have implemented this, is that they have deferred tax, and that's interest-free deferral. Just to name some countries, and India can take a cue from this. This is available on the internet. If you go and see Australia, Canada, Italy, Japan, Singapore, Switzerland, UK, US, they've all implemented this. I'm sure even if we don't implement it in that great a measure, something can be taken from that. Second, interest-free deferral of withholding tax. You withheld tax, allow some people some cash flow. That's again something which has been attempted in Sweden and Italy. Third point, not spending, operating losses of this year should be allowed to be set off without limitation. Again, this has been implemented in the US. This is an extraordinary year. Extraordinary losses are being suffered by people. If you can ensure that these will be set off in the future without limitation, it will help people. In fact, some countries have gone back to say that it's not just a carry forward. They have allowed a carry back of the losses. What does that do? Now, Germany and Japan have done a carry back of losses. What does that do? That helps you offset your tax liability of this year against the tax liability of the previous year, which may entitle you to a refund. So through a fiscal measure, you have created cash for the business. Very interesting way of doing it. And if, of course, we have to afford it. If we can't afford it, we can't do anything at all. But if we can afford it, these are good areas, good suggestions where countries are implementing these. We can also have a look at this. Some countries like Canada and Italy have actually suspended contentious litigation and collection from such litigation. Mr. Singh, in fact, had mentioned about this, that this is a time where we should ensure that these kind of contentious issues are actually brought down. Countries like Canada and Italy have actually done that. This is the time where we should say that where there are issues which are very contentious, we will not take coercive steps of recovery, because a business which is already struggling, if you go and attach their bank account, I think there will be no way in which they will be able to survive. And you need at this time probably to consider a retention allowance, a retention of labor allowance, a graded, maybe even 120, 130% deduction for people who do not retrench. Government must consider. It's easy to say that while you are not earning revenues, you will continue to carry your labor force. Very easy to say it, but very difficult to implement. And today you may offer guarantees, you may offer loans, but people are actually incurring operational losses, operational costs they are not able to meet. If they take loans for operational costs and operational losses, how are they going to repay it? These are not loans, these are not subsidies, these are not gifts that the government is giving. These are loans. So you must do something to ensure that these companies are able to tide over this time where there are actual operational cash losses. So these were some of the thoughts I think that came to mind, where I think, again, I must say that something will be affordable and something will not be affordable. But extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary measures. And I think these measures the government must look. Yes, it's been very conservative. I agree they've been very conservative. Maybe in the long run, conservatism is the way forward. But this is not the year where the government can look at its fiscal deficit. This is not the year where they can say that we need to keep the fiscal deficit in control. This is the year where you want to make people survive. This is, and I think it's a conception, where how you're thinking about if you make people survive, the government will survive, everybody will be happy in the long run. That's my short position.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for wonderful thoughts and wonderful suggestions, and very rightly say that whenever a crisis comes to the surface, it's generally the direct cash transfer which benefits and which props up the demand. And that's the reason, if you look at all kinds of packages being unfolded by either Japan or Germany, anybody, that more of cash being given to small businesses and to MSME sector to retain those labor force and also to carry on with their operations, because it's a very difficult time. Operational cost needs to be sustained, and it's not possible unless you have that. And refund is the best thing, which you said, that ultimately the putting more liquidity in the banks and cheaper loans, etc., it will not help. First thing should be the refund, which is due to you, and income tax department is the one which should be releasing more of refund. This artificial barrier of circuit breaker of 5 lakhs. Perhaps this is creating a lot of heartburns. As you rightly said that the bigger SSCs who contribute more to the exchequer kitty, they are equally entitled, and present crisis is not hurting them less. they have to also sort of, up the shutters and restart the operations and etc. and take care of their entire establishment and other expenses. They do need more liquid in hand. So perhaps, so yes, sir, you wanted to add something, sir, please. Yes, sir, please go ahead, sir. Mr. Bidhu Sekhar saying, yes, sir, you wanted to add something.
I want to endorse Mr. Gulati's suggestion. I mean, that is to say that refund is as a stimulus measure is too much actually, because it is the taxpayers' money itself which is lying there, and we are paying such a huge interest on that actually. We are paying interest of around 12% per annum on that refund, which otherwise he will not get. In fact, if he had that money, I would like to park it in refund itself rather than put it in a FD. So, this is too much that refund is being treated as a, as far as that carry forward of loss, indefinite carry forward of loss for the current year, that is an excellent suggestion, I think. That is a very good suggestion. And, but I really again say that, having worked in the department for around 36 years, I know what sort of, amounts are disputed and what is the potential for that, what is the potential of success of that. Because, generally it is seen that the appeals which are around, I think 3,83,000 or 4,83,000 appeals are pending in various forums. When this FM announced this Vivad Se Vishwas, she quoted this figure of 4,83,000 disputes, and these disputes are 20%, 10 to 20% chances of the department succeeding. So if that is so, then so much of time is wasted, so much of money is wasted pursuing our litigation, which ultimately has no effect. So it is time that this type of things are cleared. The department clears this. In fact, I was in the department when this IDS was there in 2016. At that point in time, so many complaints which were lying in various investigation directorates were transferred to the jurisdictional commissioner, and the taxpayers were confronted with that, and they came forward with. So that some sort of a revenue, and they'll be quite happy if the tax rate in that IDS scheme, the tax rate was 45%. But here we can give a concessional, very concessional rate, maybe payable for in 2 years' time or something like that. So I think the tax disputes are a big gold mine which needs to be exploited at this very moment. Thank you.
I just want to add, I think the whole concept seems to be from the stimulus package. Pro-sufferers is fine. Any country, until unless start believing in the capitalism, and fraction of business must be done with the capitalistic ideas. Until unless your 20% of your population is capitalistic in approach, it can't carry the remaining 80% of the population, and India being a large country. Looking at it from this point of view, I think it's a mindset issue, and starting with the income tax department. The first thing comes is that wherever a large multinational company, at every level create a dispute, starting from a transfer pricing, starting from not granting refund, and the classic case is the recent equalized levy. Now, look at the way it has been tried to be packaged. Now, whether it's a part of income tax, it's a finance act, you have a OECD looking into it. I mean, these shortcuts methods which are adopted to see that you are going to garner revenue around it, I think that approach is a basic problem. Second is, again, the major thrust, because the idea of any tax law is that it is a socialistic pattern where there is enough money which is collected from people who are earning money and utilized for benefit of the rest of the country. That's the basic idea, I think. And I understand that there is always a struggle that who's going to get the largest pie of the share. But you can't have your international arrangements which you have signed with different, whether it's a multilateral or bilateral. You can't override by creating these kind of shortcut through saying that my finance act, I'm introducing the equalized levy and it's not an income tax, therefore I'll not give you a DTAA benefit and therefore it's separate. mean, these kind of things are not certainly a good thing for any country which, on a longer term basis, wants to see that the economy grows. And because tax is a consequence of economy, tax is not a mean. It's not an end in itself. It's a mean. So I think that's the loss of this thing. And one more aspect, possibly, since we are looking at how we retain money in the hands, and Tarun has very, very well said, what right they have over my money? If I pay more tax, should the finance minister of India need to announce that it's in a fiscal measure or a stimulus, somebody saying that I'll give your money back? I mean, this is a mindset a problem. Now, 20% of a deposit in any appeal which is made mandatory, your quasi-judicial authorities are not able to determine whether it's a good case or bad case. Balance of convenience lies where? And you are saying 20% is mandatorily to be deposited for appeal to be heard by ITAT. I mean, look at where are we going? And these are the measure where you create a confidence in the industry, where you create a confidence in people who are investing in your country. We cannot forget the money is a flying commodity. It moves to a jurisdiction which is going to earn money for it. And in India today, whatever the large size of a consuming economy may be, we cannot grow unless we start getting an investment from outside the country. And outside the country is the basic principle. If their money is not going to earn money in this country, the money will not stay here. And the classic example is look at in last 3 months, how much of money has gone out of the stock market, which was the FIIs and FPIs. The serious size of money has gone out. This is the time of crisis where I think the confidence is the very important part. And when we talk of all these, the refunds to be given, 115 BB we are talking of, all these are a measure of confidence. Yeah, Shridhar.
So not only the FI's money, sir, in fact, even our own money has gone out of India. RBI data says that $18.6 billion, that's the kind of foreign remittances we Indians have sent abroad for various purposes.
I don't get enough confidence, sitting in India, I don't get enough confidence that my money is safe. If I start believing in other economies, and that's where the most important part, it's a very good saying which says we should not waste crisis. Crises are times we can be greatest innovative in these times. We can, simple example is look at the internet and electronic industry which has emerged in this time. And everything is going digitized and courts are also to some level, nothing is said about it. Today people are willing to move out of China. Why not a digital economy where India has a step ahead of others? Because historically, we have operated as a back-end service provider for large corporations. We can have a manufacturing base in India. This was the time, classically, crisis where people can say, and that can take a social objective also, that if somebody, let's say Apple setting up a factory in India, employing 20,000 people, why don't you deal with them by giving off some incentives and say that 20,000 workers who are going to work will go to remain the same premises? Multiple countries are doing it. But I think we need to think out of box. This is the time when possibly we can be innovative. We can use this time where multiple things can come, rather than we can, with a very narrow approach, to say that I'll grab this money from not giving a tax. I'll give a 147 notices to open up your assessment for last year's. I'll not agree with your explanation of Section 68 and therefore I impose 100 BB. I mean, these are the short-term measures. I mean, no economy can thrive on these kind of methodology being used to garner revenue. I think there's a larger approach issue to my mind in the fiscal stimulus, what I see, which is missing.
Yes, very rightly said, and Mr. Tarun also suggested that that the government needs to come up with some way, some method to perhaps monetize the ITC. In fact, I remember one good example. Yeah. Canada apparently has said that in some SSC's electronic ledger, if the ITC is 100 rupees, the revenue is going to allow that, that while discharging your tax liability, you can utilize double of the ITC which is available in your ledger.
Right.
So that's an out-of-box thinking, I mean, the 100 rupees is there, but you can utilize 200. Yeah, please.
Okay.
Right.
To add to what people have said, in fact, this is one opportunity I think which the government could have used for 2-3 things. One, as Tarun was pointing out, put an end to all these credit disputes. Okay. There's a huge amount of some so-called stupid Tran 1 disputes. which occur some 500, 600 writ petitions are filed across the country for no purpose. And what is sad is, even after the courts say that you should allow them this credit, you should, if your portal doesn't permit, then you allow them to do it manually. I don't think any single assessee has really got the benefit of any of these court sorts. And even the latest decision where the one which somebody had argued with the Delhi High Court, where they say, black something. There also they said it follows the same principle which Delhi High Court has been saying for all these years. Other high courts have said it, but the mindset is not to put an end to it. Number one, I was expecting that to happen. In fact, in one of these meetings, I did suggest, why are you going after this 500 iterations? Why don't you put an end to it? That is one. The monetization of credit, according to me, is an excellent answer, because if, for example, somebody had come saying that they had a 300 crores of ITC with them, and if you allow them to monetize it, if you look at it from the government's point of view, they will only, because there are no, this is an excess credit, so what do you do with it? The government has to give a refund of it. So how do they do it is a different point, but that's a classic example of amount being available to a business in its own books, which it can utilize for the purpose of its own, any other purpose. That's one. I don't know whether the tweaking of the rates is really in the minds of the government, because according to them, even as of now, the maximum rate, the maximum commodities are covered by the 5% rate or something. So I am not sure whether they are really going to touch the 12 or 18 or reduce most of it to 12. That is one. But if that is done, I think it will make a lot of difference to those industries, because they contribute a lot. But I thought that maybe from the existing law point of view, how do they look at business? Let us assume that as me and Sridhar used to always frequently fight on this, the situation today is that a manufacturer has all his inventory with the various dealers. Now the dealers are saying that we are not going to sell this at the price at which you have sold to us because we can't sell it. Because then the manufacturer goes around providing some more incentives to these dealers, gives more discount. The immediate reaction would be that this is not part of what a discount has contemplated in the Act, and therefore we will disallow it. So I think this, I was expecting that even within the existing GST Act, existing valuation provisions or the availability of credit, there could have been schemes or there could have been changes made to permit or allow these credits, allow the taxes to be paid on the amounts received, allow the amounts received to be agreed as a transaction value, allow business to thrive. Then look at these, the correctness of these later on. But if today a business thinks that if I allow more discount, will I get a show cause notice tomorrow? Therefore, should I do it? That mindset, if you have to remove it from the industry, I think the government has to be absolutely clear as far as the implementation of the indirect tax is concerned. So huge opportunity that is indeed available, which I was disappointed has not been done. I only hope that they take it up with the GST Council and do something on this.
I think I just want to, in fact, say something on what Mr. Shivdas has also said. And I started by saying that one big issue is of credits. And if you have free-flowing credits in an indirect tax, then the efficiency of the tax is what will make businesses competitive.
Absolutely.
But the problem lies in the mindset of the tax implementer, the authorities. The moment you start thinking and start arguing that credit is a concession that I am giving you, that is where the problem lies. Credit is unfortunately not a concession. Credit is part of the structure of the tax. By its very nature, a GST or a VAT is a tax which says that whatever be your economic activity during the course of production of these goods or services, we will not allow it to become a cost to the business. Ultimately, if my output rate is 18%, 18% is the only tax cost that the consumer will suffer. But the moment you start saying that, no, this is a concession and it is at my will that I will grant you this concession or I will take it away, that is the main problem. And that is why we have a very fractured GST which has been implemented, where credits are not being freely allowed, they are being disallowed by artificial rules, first of all. And secondly, where credits are available, they are not being able to be used by people. And when you create an inefficient system like this, who suffers? It is the business which suffers, and because this will become a cost to the business. If it becomes a cost to the business, obviously the business will try and cover its bottom line somewhere else. So ultimately, goods and services will become more expensive and the consumer will suffer. If the consumer suffers, the purchasing power goes down, the turnover of sales of goods and services will come down, government suffers. So if we change the whole mindset first to say that I have truly implemented a value-added tax system and I have to ensure that the only out tax is the output tax which is levied on the customer, and as far as the business is concerned, there will be no repercussion of this tax, because if the output rate is 18% and there is no other tax costs, then the business actually collects the tax from the consumer and deposits it with the government. That's the way an indirect tax ought to work, where the impact is on the business, but the incidence is on the consumer. The business feels no pain because of an indirect tax. That's the classical way to implement an indirect tax. But that's not what is being done, because unfortunately the mindset is that we are giving you, we are doling out some concession to you, and we can pull the rug under your feet anytime we want. And that is what needs to change. And that is what
rightly said, it's not a pass-through tax for us. Yes, correct.
What I wanted to now say, Shailendra, is that so much is being talked about direct and indirect. But what really is required right now is this not a time that in the forthcoming GST Council meeting, I agree with you, they can't do anything independently. They have to do it only with the help of the states. It's not possible constitutionally. There are so many suggestions that have come in the last 5 minutes, right from credits in section 16, what we talked about in the earlier webinars about this 180 days necessity for payments cannot be made. What Shivdas just said about special discounts in this kind of COVID impact season. I would call it a COVID impact season more than anything else. Now, how people are struggling to sell, we are not able to sell. So what happens to those kind of issues which have been raised in the past? What about the CSR expenditure? The big institutions are incurring their eligibility on ITC. And as Tarun correctly pointed out, the need to keep anti-profiteering at bay at least for some time until we stabilize. Those things can be taken up with the structural adjustments that are required for write-off of stocks which we have recommended during the COVID time. All this can not be taken up right now in the ensuing meetings, so that a proper recommendation is made to the law committee, and there is some light at the end of the tunnel. If only whatever has been announced up to now is going to help the industry, no, I think some element of amendments is required on the indirect side also, to ensure that there is some motivation to do more and sell more, and motivation for the customer also to buy more. So I agree with you, rate cut at this stage may not be possible considering the revenue situations, but some streamlining can that be thought of to leave more cash to the hands. So I think that unless you take it up in the GST Council in June, July would be too late. I mean, as a matter of fact, if between all the webinars that have started in first week of April right now till May, if in June, if we are not able to hold down to a GST Council meeting and give some effect to whatever the industry and the trade wants by the first week of July, I don't think it will be late also. For example, last week or week before last, there was a small kind of photograph that showed in what happens in malls. It seems because of the difference in the air conditioning temperature zones, that air conditioning, perhaps fungus, has spoiled. They put up one particular trade called handbags trade. The entire handbag showroom, fungus has sat on the handbags. And I'm just trying to highlight one of the problems that comes in when you close down a business for 2 months. It's not so easy. And there are so many such examples that have been shown in the papers in the last 2 months. What happens? About 1 month ago, there was an article on Gurgaon on how the breweries are discharging beer that they could not sell. Of course, it's a subject to state tax and not subject to GST. There's a separate issue. But I'm just trying to point out the products. Like this, there were so many things that require immediate attention. And if you leave time in June, I don't know why Shivdas didn't say this, July may be too late.
Yeah. Anyway, the beer flowing into the drains is a very sad story in itself.
That's more of a joke.
That's true. Absolutely. I think, I mean, we have plenty to talk. We have already given a lot of suggestions. Maybe, we should throw open the floor for some Q&A, some kind of questions from some of the attendees, So we have a few questions already with me. One gentleman is asking that why RBI is infusing more liquidity and government not giving any tax benefits under direct and indirect taxes. So as a taxpayer, he's confused, or maybe as a business, representing a business enterprise, perhaps confused that there is so much of money being given by the RBI to the banks, but the government is not giving anything to us.
No, I think.
Sorry, Balveer, go ahead.
Yeah. See, I think simply when it first comes to a point, the question is that from where the money is going to come. And it's a classic way is that there is a borrowing by the government. Or second is or RBI print a currency and they purchase the bonds issued by the government. So that's the way to create a liquidity for the government. Now, how is that liquidity government is going to spend is a classic question. Now, if this money, and the easiest way for any government to think is that if your banks are flushed with funds, then offtake will happen because the borrowers need not give any kind of a collateral which the government is protecting. I think that's a very classic theory of economics where the governments think that once we have created a liquidity, and that's, I think the example comes from a crisis of 2008, the banks failed because there was a shortage of liquidity at that time, and this is certainly a different time. So it's not an issue of creating a liquidity. And second is the government is very concerned about giving money and then looking at the inflation as a very serious challenge. So I think on that front, the government is looking only on one side, and we have discussed enough on supply and demand side. But coming to a tax concession, whether the tax concession should be given to somebody or not, in my understanding, if we look at the direct tax and maybe indirect tax, some kind of a leeway may there be tinkering of tax rates. But more than tax incentives, I think the idea of deferring the tax, because I don't think on looking at environment we are in today, in FY 2021, there is going to be any serious income which will require any tax to be paid. Largely it is emerging. So I don't think it is going to be any, it's a question of the booking of losses and how long you can carry those losses. So I don't think any tax benefit in terms of rate cut will help. The point is ultimately there is no income, there is no question of tax. And if there is no supply, there is no question of GST. So the fundamental point is that a tax incentive may not be a great way to, in terms of tax cutting, but we need to find out a way that the money come in the hands of people. To that extent, that question is right. I think whether you should give a money on a supply side or a demand side, but purely tax, people thinking that because the tax rate is cut, moderation certainly is going to help, but you need to move the wheel of the economy. I think that's where the real question lies to my mind.
Absolutely, sir. We have another gentleman asking a question that post-COVID, the consumers would prefer online shopping to avoid going out. And there may be some specific, some incentive perhaps which should be given to digital platform, which are actually promoting e-commerce. So,
I think that's what we were discussing. That's what we were discussing. I said that the government needs to realize opportunities. If the digital world is the next opportunity, the way the businesses are conducted, I'm not saying that these should be tax-free, but there has to be some mechanism where some kind of a push should be given to this industry, because this is going to be next GDP creating sector we are looking at?
There is a gentleman who has this telecom industry background, and he said that everybody knows that the financial health of the sector, which is the lifeline of the economy, and people in this difficult times, we have been asking the government, endlessly, that they allow us to use accumulated GST credit related to payment of GST and the reverse charge on regulatory charges paid to government to pay the regulatory dues payable to the government only after AGR dues, but no decision till date. Yeah. So they have a valid ground. Yes.
This is exactly what I had said, that you need to allow monetization of credit. Correct. Apart from that, of course, the government, if it seriously wants the telecom industry to survive, will have a look at what AGR means. Of course, the Supreme Court judgment is there, but the concept is all haywire, according to me, because if you're wanting to charge license fees on the interest that somebody earns on a fixed deposit, or on some if it has shares in a shipping company and it gets dividend, you want to charge license fee for running a telecom license on that, then according to me the government is losing the script any which way. It's not then bothered about the health of the industry at all. All it is bothered about is collecting more and more. Whichever way it comes, it makes no difference.
And on that question of whether it is possible for utilization of ITC, which is accumulated on account of reverse charge, etc., you are expecting a complete U-turn in the thinking of the government to happen.
Right.
You are not looking at the change, keeping the same mindset. You are looking at something completely different. And these are amendments that were made even after we succeed in the courts. That this is this we will not allow, this we will not allow. So we expect that this stage, yes, one way is to like, yes, this crisis is there, therefore we keep that mindset out and allow you a full flow of credit. That's a different point. But then with these changes having been made over a period of time to overcome judgments, whether they will do it now is $1 million question.
True.
That is why I said mindset change is what is, our mindsets have changed sitting at home. We have become extremely positive about many things. In fact, we are joking and we are smiling and we are doing all of that because, as I said in the initial parts of this webinar, because of privileged circumstances probably, but the mindset of the government also needs to change. I think, if it becomes pro-business, it will gain it on its own. And pro-business does not mean anti-people. That is the mindset which needs to change. There is a huge amount of debate in the media to say that, oh, so you are helping business, so you are anti-people. That's unfortunately not true.
Absolutely. On this ITC front, what reminds me is one very famous couplet from Ghalib. The Ghalib said that, the Umar bhar Ghalib, yehi bhool karta raha.
I said Ghalib needs to come down to tell the government what to do now.
Exactly. This ITC front particularly struck me that Umar bhar Ghalib, yehi bhool karta raha, धूल चेहरे पे थे और आईना साफ करता रहा. So that stimulus which we are talking about, the ITC, if they do this, one gentleman has asked this question that as trade interested with implementation of e-invoicing and the conditions of section 16 to be abolished, AC has already directed in the case of TVS, if the supplier is not, it has not filed the returns, the credit of recipient cannot be denied. The department should catch hold of the defaulter and not the recipient. So again, the ITC, the legislations need to be revamped, particularly with respect to ITC.
Right. See, Shailendra, this is I think a thought of the court, at least for the past 20 years.
Correct.
Yes. It's not the first time. 20 years the court has been saying, Mister, you are catching somebody else for somebody else's fault. Right. But till now, there has not been a positive awareness from anybody in the authority to say, yes, this is what we will follow.
No, they are amending the rules to say that we will, if somebody else has not filed the return, so much of your credit will be
blocked. Will block the credit.
Bringing in this, absurd kind of, concepts in the statute itself or in the delegated legislation. But unfortunate, because today, if I have paid the tax to my supplier, I can't do anything more than that. So how can I be responsible for the default of that person if he is not deposited his tax or he's not filed his return properly. It's absurd.
I think this is what the distrust is. That's what there has to be some kind of a trust. And who's supposed to do this job? The credit taking person is not responsible to chase everyone. You have your systems, you have legislation in place, you have authority under these respective legislation. If you make people run around to check their credits across the country, I think this distrust cannot take industry forward. There has to be some kind of faith in the industry for capital creation.
Absolutely, sir. So, Mr. Bridhu Sekhar Singh wanted to say something. Yes, sir. You wanted to add something here.
No. I don't want to add.
So, sir, in fact, I mean, we will have some more question. Meanwhile, what I suggest is that we are also, running against the clock.
Sharadhar, can I have a request to drop off? Because to drop off, I have something personal to add. Can
please. Sir, please go ahead. Please go ahead and carry on. Thank you, sir. Let me thank you for your wonderful thoughts and valuable inputs which you added to make this deliberation and our debate very interesting. And we look forward to inviting you again, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye. So, sir, in fact, what I suggest is that before we wrap up, maybe, a couple of suggestions, at least 2 important suggestions you would like to give. Just 2. Although, I mean, we have a very large basket of suggestions. But, let's focus on only 2. Each panelist, including Mr. Sridhar, perhaps, Only 2 suggestions for the government. So far as fiscal stimulus is concerned. So far, we have got only economic stimulus, not fiscal stimulus. So maybe, something for the fiscal stimulus. Let's start with the direct tax side. Yes, sir. So maybe let me start with you only, sir. What exactly on direct tax front the government should do?
You're asking me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. No, I mean, as I said earlier also, the room for direct tax is very little. But one good suggestion was that indefinite carry forward of loss. This is one good thing. And secondly, all the refunds should be granted. I mean, there should not be any qualification. Obviously, subject to that, that if there is some reason to be recorded, then it is okay. But otherwise, it should be granted. It should not be made a virtue out of a necessity. And then lastly, I again stress that the department should concentrate on dispute resolution rather than enforcement for this year at least.
Right. Wonderful, sir. Yes, sir. So let me go to Mr. Sivdas. Yes, sir.
Sir, my only 2 suggestions are: 1, allow all industries to utilize whatever ITCs they have, irrespective of the source of the ITC. Is it on a forward charge? Is it on a reverse charge? Is it on capital goods? Is it on raw material? When did you receive the credits? Did you receive it within 180 days, more than 180 days? Is it used for what purpose? Is it used for particular activity, not used for a particular activity? Just forget it. Give him the entire ITC, ask him to utilize it, allow him to utilize it for payment of tax. 2, allow every company to pay tax at the time when he receives the consideration from the purchaser. Whatever be the consideration, you don't get into your head of why this consideration has been determined. No. If he says, I have sold 100 rupees worth goods today at 70 rupees because that is what he will purchase, allow him to pay tax on 70. Don't raise disputes. Tell the business that for the next 6 months, we allow you to function in this manner. See after 6 months, what is the extent to which the trade is responding to.
Wonderful, sir. So let me go to, before I go to Tarunji, let me go to Mr. Sridhar. I mean, he's bubbling with more ideas, I guess. Yes, Mr. Sridhar, please.
No, one thing is, my take is, since the other takes have come, GST Council meeting immediately required in June to take up all the chamber suggestions that came on the impact of COVID in indirect taxes. That is 1. 2, liberalization of ITC thought, the actions and monetization of credits in other areas as we just discussed. So these are the 2 top priorities, and the GST Council should consider all the suggestions that was made. Even we have had 2 webinars around that, and we have given some articles also in TIOL from our side also.
Yes, they're considering it. Yes. I can tell you that.
That much of confidential information we have.
I can tell you that. When it comes, I will tell you. Let me go to Tarunji now. Yes.
I said, credits, there are several things that need to be done to ensure utilization. Second, I think on the direct tax side, one thing can be seriously looked at. When we talk about a carry back of losses, what does this mean? Carry back. So today, if I am a company and I have a demand of a previous year, say of 1 crore. In this COVID year, I am incurring a loss. This can be a dispute resolution mechanism also. If you allow a set off of that loss against that disputed demand also, in some sense, you can call it quits. Otherwise, this business, which will become profitable or may not become profitable tomorrow, this loss will go waste. So there is a possibility. So there is, if you try and do some kind of a scheme by which you say that, okay, in the past 3 years, if you've got outstanding demands and you have a loss in this extraordinary year because of the pandemic, we are allowing a set off by carry back, not carry forward. Something like that. It can be a fantastic way of bringing down litigation and maybe putting more cash in the hands of the businesses, and really not really then not really then distressing the businesses more by coercive measures of recovery against demands.
Absolutely, it's a wonderful suggestion. So in fact, we, good number of attendees actually, they have been giving us suggestions and lace up questions, So I think, their suggestions are equally valid, very useful suggestions. And, on trust front, somebody has suggested that, technology should be, utilized more to build the trust, because then human intervention is not there, but I think we are forgetting that there is always a man behind the technology. So I mean, unless that man, the mindset changes there, the technology also starts playing the way the man thinks. So,
technology should be more pro-business used. You see, you can't use data analytics to point out all mistakes committed by the supplier, by the recipient, and then say, this is what is the result of my analytics. I think we should really look at use of technology in a way in which it is presumed that both the people have given truth in their respective accounts. You use that for that purpose, then you will come out with a situation where you will have less of, I would say, aberrations being pointed out.
Absolutely wonderful. In fact, yes. So, sir, before we have already exceeded, the benchmark which we had in our mind by 60 minutes. So, I think it's time now to wrap up. And before we wrap up, 2 suggestions from my account also, because everybody has suggested, as rightly said, that I mean, since the government director side, of course, the hands are tied. But I feel that if the demand has to be propped up and legged up, and demand is the one which is going to play the role of a real savior for the economy. I mean, all taxes, indirect taxes, etc., we are talking about, but unless we have the money and we buy goods or services, the things will not improve. And I believe so somehow the government this time again, they have to give more money in the hands of taxpayers in whatever manner they could think. And the first thing they should do is that, of course, whatever refund is pending here and there, it's certainly not a favor they are doing. That money should be released immediately on top priority basis in next 30 days. So, I mean, that is something we should do, including IGST and ITC, accumulated ITC, the input tax credit, which is pending for a long, long time. So I think that should be, through some deadline, maybe 15 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks maximum. And the secondly, sir, I personally feel that, maybe on the indirect tax side, they should also think in terms of, this is the right time to think in terms of another amnesty scheme or and litigation, probably resolution scheme, even for the GST. There's so much of things which are pending now in 3 years, and the law itself has been amended so many times that, the assessment process will begin now. and a lot of unnecessary notices, flying around, thickly here and there, and it's troubling the businesses in a more grievous manner. So somehow, that should be taken care of, and direct tax side, little more attractive amnesty scheme should come. I mean, although previously, whatever we have gone through, we have seen all those black money, amnesty scheme, etc. It has not worked because, again, they had some of those unrealistic riders. So probably they should have a very liberal scheme, and let people, whatever cash has been already accumulated, in last few years after this demonetization, etc. Probably, that it's a good time for the income tax department to mop up and collect some revenue, which will certainly help the the exchequer also, and for the government to give away in terms of some kind of doles to the tax bills. So let me thank all the speakers for their valuable time and for wonderful suggestions, and for making it, this stimulus package debate a very stimulating debate. So thank you. Let me thank Mr. Sridas, Mr. Tarunji, of course, Mr. Siddhar, Mr. Vidhusekhar Singh, and of course, Balbir ji is not here, but of course, I mean, sir, we will connect again, and we will try to make it more lively and interesting and let me also thank all the attendees, for their patience, I mean, they are sort of, we are matching, not running out of patience. Either the panelists are not running out, or attendees are also not running out. So that's a good thing. We will connect again, sir, and let's hope that something good comes out for the economy, for the taxpayer, for everybody. Thanking you all, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.